Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot welcoming you to the latest episode of our podcast, Running, State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week we have what I thought was a great conversation with Chris Chavez, the founder and principal owner of Citius Mag, a relatively new and very active part of the media that's covering running and track and field. Chris just turned 30, which makes him one of the younger track journalists out there.
But he's been a running fan and a participant since his teen years and learned his reporting and writing skills at Sports Illustrated. So he's the complete package, an enthusiast and a serious journalist combined. Before we speak with Chris, Amby and I want to discuss some recent running news and particularly other podcasts we've enjoyed listening to this year. Amby, what have you been paying attention to?
Of course, at the beginning of the new year, there's not a whole lot of running news to report. But it is interesting that Eliud Kipchoge and Sifan Hassan are both going to the Tokyo Marathon in March. Frankly, I didn't know that Tokyo had a big enough budget to gather in two of the biggest names in running. Also, I guess I would have expected that Kelvin Kiptum, the new world record holder, would be going to London in April. But instead, he's headed to Rotterdam. So I think his team is pretty clearly setting up a sort of a time trial marathon where he's going to take aim at that sub-2 mark. On the podcast front, George, as newbies to this activity, you and I have been listening to and trying to learn from some of the best out there. Certainly, Chris Chavez's Citius Mag podcast is one of them. They've had recent interviews with the likes of C.J. Albertson, Caitlin Toohey, and Parker Valby. Chris focuses on the elite end of the sport, as does the Let's Run podcast, with Robert and Weldon Johnson and the amazing, seemingly steel-trap mind, Jonathan Gault. I particularly like that Let's Run doesn't shy away from controversy, as I think too many other podcasts do. At Let's Run, they're ready to discuss the important stuff like USATF governance, what is going on with doping in Kenya, and where should we come out on the question of transgender athletes? One of my only complaints about podcasts is that the big ones all have sponsors because they're trying to make some money. That's fine.
Why not?
But it forces the podcast producer, editor to swear their undying love for whoever the sponsor is this week or this month. And frankly, that's a little bit hard to swallow. It's also why I particularly like a podcast from Coach Jason Koop called The Koopcast. He speaks with global sports science experts, doesn't accept any sponsorship whatsoever, and that way he can say what he truly believes about all the digital gizmos and nutritional supplements that are streaming into the marketplace. Like so many others, I find Des Linden and Kara Goucher kind of a dream team in podcasting. And their Nobody Asked Us podcast is really interesting to listen to every week because it's unscripted. I guess it's every 2 weeks, I should say. It's unscripted. You never know what they're going to come out with, and I don't think they know what they're going to come out with either. And finally, hats off completely to Allie Feller and her Allie on the Run podcast, which I find to be the epitome of hustle, enthusiasm, and professionalism. Who else gets as guests Chelsea Clinton, Mark Zuckerberg's sister, Ellie Kemper from The Office TV show, and the American Marathon record holder, Emily Sisson, all the while fighting a personal and quite public battle with cancer. So I say, Allie Feller, you're really off the charts. Fantastic. George, now it's your turn. Any thoughts on the ones I've mentioned, or what are some of your favorite podcasts?
Yeah, I like all of those, and I've got a bunch of favorites, Amby. One that you and I have talked about that is really engaging is got a great title, Some Work, All Play, with David and Megan Roach, who are two elite ultra marathoners. And they certainly talk about running, and they really get under the hood of training as well. But what makes them so, I think, fun to listen to is they cover so much more, including their own marriage. They get into their relationship and their baby son, and they talk about books and movies they've enjoyed and sports of all kinds. They love the NFL, and it's just even hear them on just about anything. They were riffing on AI the other day, and they're just a total pleasure to hang out with. And I hope, Amby, we can get those two to join us someday on our podcast. I think they'd be great fun. And another of our friends is Set the Pace with New York Roadrunner CEO Rob Simmelcare and marathon great Meb Kivleski. Of course, we had Rob on here with us recently, and I think they're a terrific combination because Rob brings kind of a first-rate sportscaster's background, which he had from NBC and ESPN, and then Meb, of course, is Meb, the generation's top American marathon runner, sharing his knowledge. And I just like the way they kind of blend their talents and make it awfully interesting. The last one quickly I'll mention is Mario Fraioli. He's called The Morning Shakeout, and he goes deeper into the questions below the surface, I think, than any of the other running podcasters. And as you know, Amby, he was very generous to us when we were contemplating doing a podcast, and we were absolutely clueless. We went out for coffee with him this past April at the Boston Marathon. We grabbed a coffee and a bagel at Finagle a Bagel and sat with him, and he couldn't have been just more open and generous in sharing his years of wisdom and doing this and building the following that he's built. So those are a few that I certainly listen to when I'm on the treadmill or the elliptical.
This podcast, Running State of the Sport, is brought to you by marathonhandbook.com and runlongrunhealthy.com. Marathon Handbook is the world's leading marathon website with a special focus on trustworthy running information and free, runner-tested training plans for all ability levels.
Run Long, Run Healthy is Amby's weekly newsletter with the newest, most scientific, and most useful training advice for runners.
Next, let's turn to our guest this week, Chris Chavez. He's the founder of Citius Mag, a relative newcomer to the media landscape that covers elite running and track and field. Chris, welcome to our podcast, Running State of the Sport.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be with two legends who have covered, running and track and field for many decades. I'm just trying to keep up.
So, Chris, tell us a little bit about you, your, quick bio, and how old you are, where you're living now, where did you grow up, a little of that kind of stuff, and how you spend your time now.
Yeah, so I'm a New Yorker through and through. I was born and raised in New York. I'm 30, just turned 30 back in September, and I oversee everything at Citius Mag. So Citius Mag was my baby, born in 2017 while I was still a writer at Sports Illustrated. I was there for 6.5 years as a writer and editor, overseeing the breaking news team. So I got a lot of newsroom experience through that. Got to cover the Rio Olympics in 2016, and that was a dream come true. But even before that, I had some experience covering track from my days at Flow Track from like 2012 to 2014, and then I spent some time as a writer for ESPN.com following an internship that I did with them. So I was a contributor there, and so it's been really cool just kind of seeing the way that sports media has evolved over the last 10, 11, 12 years, and being a part of that too, just at the forefront of a lot of those changes, and trying to find innovative ways for the way that Citius Mag covers track, through our web coverage on citiusmag.com, through our podcast, through our newsletters or social media, testing new things out on TikTok and wherever, fans' eyeballs are. So that's been really cool and rewarding, to have that be part of my job. And that's what I spend my 9 to 5. And when I'm not, writing or talking about running, I'm out there doing my own running, as part of a Central Park Track Club in New York City.
So, Chris, it seems a little unusual to me for a 30-year-old to be a big athletics fan the way you are. Could you tell us how you became an athletics track running fan, and maybe a little bit about your own running?
Yeah, my own running is can be described as mediocre. I've been on this quest to break 5 minutes for the mile and 3 hours for the marathon for the longest time. My PR is 5:09 and 3:06, but I think this upcoming year, 2024, will be my year, and I'll get it. But I've been saying that for a long time. And as far as being a track fan, like it's an obsession now, and it's become my favorite sport. But it wasn't always that case. When I was growing up, I was a diehard Yankees fan, and I dreamed of being the guy who takes up the mantle after Derek Jeter as the New York Yankees shortstop. But that's only one person's job, and my dreams quickly faded after my freshman year baseball tryouts. I got cut in like the first or second round. And so that's when I had to make, a big pivot and figure out, well, I still want baseball to be my job. So what's the next closest thing? And that was, the press box. So I wanted to be a baseball writer. And when I got to Marquette University studying journalism, that was still kind of the goal. But it was also around this time in 2012 when, the excitement and the stories for around the 2012 Olympics were starting to ramp up. And so there happened to be one night where I stayed in and on a Friday and caught, some races that were taking place at Occidental College at one of the high performance meets that they have out there. And I was just kind of, hooked because I was a sprinter in high school and then decided to just start running for my own health and wellness in college. And I figured, I'd do some 5Ks here and there. And so I ran a 20-minute 5K in like April. And then when I stayed in and I watched Dathan Ritzenhein in this random race run 13 something, he was so overcome with emotion because I guess he'd been through a long, bout of injuries, and, his hopes of qualifying for the Olympics may have been in limbo, but, this was a big turning point for him. And I was just hooked because, 13 minutes sounded like, crazy to me. And then at the same time, it was, learning that there's so many more athletes out there aside from Usain Bolt that make up track and field and athletics that have so many really cool, awesome, interesting stories. And so in that case, I decided before London to basically reverse engineer myself as a fan, going back and watching YouTube videos of old races and reading stories from the Sports Illustrated archives of past, Olympics and Olympic trials. And so that was it's not your traditional way of being a fan of a sport. Like my colleagues Kyle Merber and Mac Fleet, were accomplished athletes in their own right, and they grew up, wanting to be professional track athletes and dreams of the Olympics. And that was not me. Like I just happened to, find this avenue that I was like, no one's telling these athlete stories that widely. What can I do to help change that and amplify it. So, I saw a little bit of an avenue for myself as like, let's try and become the track guy. You have an Adrian Wojnarowski in the NBA, and Adam Schefter in the NFL, and I was like, what if could I be that guy for track? And so very quickly I saw an opportunity, and yeah, it's been cool to develop a lot of those relationships over the years through the various different jobs and roles that I've taken on.
Sports Illustrated is an incredible place to get your journalism training. Tell us a little bit. You talked about this sort of huge portfolio that you've got right there at Citius. Tell us about some of the similarities and the differences that you're seeing now with your own business and when you were back at Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, Sports Illustrated was interesting because that was where I got a big feel of just the way that people are consuming news, and obviously digital first nowadays. The magazine, they've even cut back on, just the frequency that it was released while I was there. And, the print industry it's sad, but like it's going through many rounds. We see it across, various different publications, many rounds of layoffs. And I happen to be lucky to have survived 3 big ones at SI. And so, that was unfortunate. And so while I was there, definitely, I had editors who cared about, track and field and the Olympics. Richard O'Brien was a very quick mentor for me there. When I got there very early on, I was just so passionate about it, and I cared about every meet, like whether it was the Stanford Invitational or the Florida Relays or whatever it was. I was ready to bug my editors with like, hey, here's, a 500-word story on this, or here's a profile on Shalane Flanagan ahead of the New York City Marathon, or whatever it might be. And, I never really got any sort of pushback from like, no, let's not do that or anything like that. Any idea I came forward with, they were quick to green light. And, that's because I would cover, track year round. And then around the key big events and Olympic trials or the Olympics, I got to be right next to Tim Layden, and he's, arguably, the best, track and field rider of his generation. Or arguably all time, some people can make the case too. So he was so good, and I would see how he would operate of, being able to watch an entire day's track meet and find a common theme to weave a whole story around for the whole day, so that the next, late that night or the next morning, you could read something of his and there would be like this theme that connected to all of these different races from these different disciplines. And that was really cool to see, just like how masterful he was at that. But at the same time, like I knew that I would be many years away from, reaching that level. And he's put in decades and decades of work at, newspapers and different places before that. And so, it's an art form for sure. And so I was definitely more of the just straight news kind of guy, just like, hey, here's what happened and here's the facts and all that stuff. But I always viewed those as like reps to get stronger when you ultimately do want to try and take on some of the longer form, bigger stuff. And so, and at the same time, I was vigilant of how things are changing around in the media landscape, how, crucial having a presence on social media is, and how timely things need to be. And so I learned so much, while I was at SI. And then at the same time, when I started Citius while I was at SI, it came as a result of, coming back from the Rio Olympics. I had a case of writer's block that fall where I think I was like, I found out it was a real thing where, I cared so much about those little meets that I mentioned before, but at the same time, realizing that a place like Sports Illustrated isn't necessarily going to give track as much attention in an off year, say a 2018 or, even in a 2019, a world championship year. A lot of these mainstream publications care about, Olympic sports in an Olympic year. And so the investment in resources aren't as readily available, but I still had that itch to, put out a 500-word story on a meet that took place at Stanford or something like that. I just needed the outlet. So I created my own with a couple of buddies and decided to start a blog where, I would geek out on track and field. And very quickly, I came to an agreement with my bosses at SI where it was like, if it was anything that was like very track nerdy and analytical and all that stuff, put it on Citius. If I was breaking a news story or it was a longer feature or a higher profile athlete, it would go to SI. So I found that balance really quickly, and I'm super thankful for my boss there, Ryan Hunt, who was great about it, and it worked out. But I never thought that Citius would be my full-time job when I first started. It was just a passion project and a little thing on the side, and very quickly, started doing the podcasting every week, and people received it really well, and so it just snowballed. And by the time 2021 rolled around and closed out, I was ready to, take a leap of faith. And now I've been doing it 2 years full time.
Chris, so, at Sports Illustrated, where we were also great friends with Rich O'Brien, Tim Layden, Kenny Moore beforehand, of course, through the years, you were, let's call it a small plug in a rather big enterprise. Here at Citius, do you own the thing? Do you have other co-owners? Who are some other contributors who are important to Citius?
Yeah, so I guess I started it and I owned it 100% of it until Kyle Merber and Mac Fleet came into it. And so now Kyle is a 10% owner and, Mac's got his own shares of it as well. So the three of us are the owners of Citius Mag. And we have, not done any sort of investment round or anything like that. Like we just happen to be able to, over time, from those years from 2017 to 2021, slowly but surely, City has started to make money through, advertising and sponsorships and event partnerships that by the end of 2021, I saw an opportunity. I was like, okay, I think I could do this full time next year. And we've got a bit of a blueprint to do it, and we'll contract some people out. So we have some photographers on retainer, and we have other podcasters on regular stipends and retainers. But it's we're still in startup mode. We're super small. Like I think what blows people away sometimes is when they realize it's like, oh, who's behind the Twitter account? And it was like, sometimes that's me. And who makes the graphics? Well, that's still sometimes me. And who edits the podcast? Occasionally that's still me. So like, we're at that phase where like I've kind of learned all these different skills and I just put them to use. And, we definitely, a big initiative of ours is to tap into younger emerging talent and create that opportunity as well for them, because for the longest time it's a lot of the same faces covering track, and we want to give the sport a young voice as well, and be able to appeal to the younger generations of fans, and a diverse coalition of fans as well. So that's why, in addition to Citius Mag, like the Magic Boost is a program that I've been able to start over the last couple of years with some other people, and it's been cool to help mentor and amplify and support some of these younger emerging voices within the sport, because I was the 19-year-old kid in the mix zone in 2013, and for a while I continued to be the youngest person in the space, and I was like, around 2020, that's when the idea was like, we need more younger people. And so that's kind of like how things, came about with that. And it's been cool, because now I can go to a world championships and I'll see, more Black women in the space, more younger photographers, and more people active on social media. So that's been really cool. And it's Citius has been kind of at the forefront of it as well, to try and be a home for some of those younger voices, because the more people we have covering the sports and telling these athlete stories, the better.
Citius is at the forefront for sure, and you've got others in the digital media space. Let's Run, Runner Space, Float Track. How do you all stay? I mean, athletics is not got a huge fan base, as we know, and is the pie big enough to make all these viable businesses?
Yeah, certainly. I think so. And I think we all do things very differently. Flow Track and Runner Space, they're rights holders to a lot of events. And so they stream things year round. You can go on a weekend and go onto Runner Space's website, and they've got 5 different events happening, all at the same time. And so that's kind of the avenue I view them in, is definitely the streaming and broadcasting space. And Let's Run has its front page that links out to everything, and they do their own sort of great reporting from John Galt, and they probably get a lot of web traffic from the message boards, a place I don't really try and venture off into too much. And and then Citius, we're different because we, I think, do social media maybe the best of them, and at the same time we push news, but we're in an interesting space where I don't consider us journalists. Like, I come from a strong journalism background, and I've got the journalist mindset to things, and I know how to operate, a newsroom and now a media company. But we approach it differently, where we're definitely more of the hype guys for the sport. Like, we feel that we want to get the sport to a healthy place and be excited about it, and hopefully our excitement about things is contagious to people, that they want to know more and they want to know who these athletes are. And so we're here to definitely uplift the profile of some of these top stars. And this upcoming year is going to be a big year for the sport, for the athletes, and I would say for ourselves as well. So I think it's been cool because we operate in a way where a lot of sponsorship money comes from partnerships with a lot of these brands that support the athletes, because they see our excitement and engagement with our fans, with our readers, listeners, supporters, and the athletes as well. The athletes have been receptive to what we do, and these are the brands that are their biggest asset is the athletes. And so if we can come together to bring some more attention and hype and excitement around an event or a certain person, then that's where I think we come in and do our job best.
So Chris, I want to start asking you direct questions about the sport. We'll move on from media and journalism. Olympic year coming up. What's your favorite sport that you're looking forward to covering? The favorite event in 2024, and what makes it your favorite?
This is interesting. This is a good one because I think there's so many good options, and
you only get one.
I know, and it'll be cool because I'm wondering how this Netflix documentary series that's been following the sprinters is going to turn out, and what storylines they choose to push. And at the same time, I spoke with one of the producers of them just while I was in Budapest, and they said that at the moment that the word got out about those who they were following, that they were choosing to follow the sprinters, every single other event category approached them and was like, well, you got to do us next. And so you hear from the 1500 guys, you hear from the marathoners, you got to follow the marathon, you got to follow the 1500. The 1500, I guess, has just become one of the most fascinating events. Just the personalities are great, with a Josh Kerr and a Jakob Ingebrigtsen, and the event is at an all-time high with the talent, and they're running fast times, and you think it's a sure bet that Jakob Ingebrigtsen is going to win the whole thing, and twice now he's been shocked at the World Championships. And so I think the storylines are great and the personalities are awesome, that it's hard to not to choose the 1500. And I also I think part of that comes from me constantly being surrounded by Kyle and Mac, at work, and just how much they talk about the event, that it's rubbed off on me. And so, whether it is the men's side with all those characters, or just the brilliance of Faith Kipyegon on the women's side, it is such a great race, and it only takes 4 minutes.
Speaking of great 1500 milers, there was another great period with Seb and Seb Coe and Steve Ovett and Steve Cram that in some ways it sort of mirrored what we're seeing now, where there was just a huge interest in the mile. And of course, here's Seb now running World Athletics. If you had a 3-minute session with Seb, and you could give him your thoughts on what the sport could use, what would you tell him right now?
Yeah, it's funny because Seb has been on my podcast, I think twice or 3 times now, and we had the chance of having him on stage with us when we did a little live show at the pre-classic, and he's great. I feel like he's got his ideas in the right place. And he knows, I think he just recently, I think this past week, had like a media availability where he stressed the importance of a younger generation of
Yeah.
fans and appealing to them. And I think like that's the avenue to definitely explore. And so, one thing, and this might be selfishly, is, collaborating with, the likes of a Citius Mag or some of these younger, these places that have those audiences already built into place. Because, it's one thing for World Athletics to try and, start its own thing, say, hey, we want to do a documentary series or whatever it might be. We want to, do this campaign, focusing on younger track creatives. It's, there's other people already doing it. And so I think, like, why reinvent your own thing when you could just help and amplify and support some other places that are doing it already? And so I always go back to just sort of the fact that for the longest time and for generations, I think a lot of these, whether it's shoe companies or governing bodies, have been targeting like the phrase that gets thrown around all the time is just, we got to make that 5-hour marathoner care about what's happening, at the front of the race and who's winning. And that's been a battle people have been fighting for decades, and no one's won it. And like, you haven't been able to make that connection. I think what we need to focus our efforts on is the younger demographic that is in high school. Everyone goes back to the participation numbers being at an all-time high for high school track and field. Well, many of those kids don't even realize that there's a professional side to the sport or an elite side to the sport. And so it's, how can we get our stars and our athletes and the key events in front of them and making them aware that it's a thing, and also you should care and watch. So that's what I go back to, is let's stop trying to fight over, appealing to the 5-hour marathoners. Yeah, there could be some efforts there, and the marathon's in a healthy place. Like, the road running numbers are crazy right now. Let's get kids interested in the elite side of track and field and keep them interested, for decades to go.
Chris, I think you may have heard about these new shoes, which we loosely call super shoes. Are they ruining the sport or making it more interesting?
It's well, again, like, I need all the help I can get to try and break 5 minutes and 3 hours. So I'm using them, and so yeah, it's kind of it's just a total recalibration, I think, in terms of just like what's fast, right? And like, we're gonna go through these periods every couple years, I think, and it's gonna be on World Athletics to try and regulate what the rules are around the shoes. And so, I think what we saw in 2017 was Nike was way ahead of everyone because they were the first, and then it was a game of catch up for all the other brands. And then, around 2021, 22 even, I would say, like, the other brands did catch up, and now we see some great performances from athletes in Asics and New Balance and even Adidas now with that $500 shoe, which is crazy to me. And so, like, we did hit that equilibrium, but then we're going to go through the same thing over again, where another little tweak or advance or change is going to happen, and we're going to have to, go through that all over again. And there's going to be it could be Nike, it could be another brand that's going to be up ahead again. And so that's just, how I feel technology plays into sports. And I think when we hit that level playing field, that's when, you have a good output of stories focused on the athletes. But sometimes, when we get blown away by, a 2-hour and 11-minute women's marathon, the headline becomes about the shoes and not the athlete, and diving into their training and what their story was beforehand. And so that's the trap I think we sometimes fall into. So it's just kind of at least having the bodies or people to be cognizant of that and still highlight who the athletes are instead of focusing on the tech all the time, because the technology is the easy headline. I'd rather read a story about how Tigges Assefa pulled off the training to make that happen and what was taking place all those years that she was away from road racing. And so there just needs to be someone to help tell those stories, and because the tech stuff will always be appealing to a bigger population sometimes too, because it's easy to appeal to someone and be like, this $500 shoe is going to make you faster. And so I'm always going to go back to the athlete stories first. And so hopefully there is still sort of like, yeah, tech is one thing, but then at the same time, the athlete is the one that's in the shoes or on the track or following the lights, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the personalities are what are going to really drive the interest. And, I just think of, I follow you, of course, and just even, well, I don't know, the last couple of weeks, I think you've done some terrific ones. Caitlin Toohey becoming a pro, and you talked to her, and I was really intrigued when you spent some time with Rai Benjamin, one of my favorites in the sport, the great 400-meter hurdler champion, and you did a piece on him becoming a cyclist and
Yeah.
obviously becoming a pretty good one pretty quickly. And I was really charmed by the story you did with the world champion high jumper from Ukraine, Yaroslava, who, she's obviously gets a lot of support these days as a Ukrainian, and she's a Vogue cover model.
Yeah.
And I thought those stories that these are just ones you've done in the last few weeks, and I think you're right. I think that's where you're going to drive interest.
Yeah, I think like it's some of those little things. It's just catching on to noticing, hey, this person's doing this off the track, and let's talk about that for a bit more. It's very easy to write a story about, a results-based performance. It's like X person ran this fast and came in this place, but it's a whole nother thing to be like, well, this person spent the off season cycling, and that's not all like a 400-meter hurdler, getting into cycling, like what are the pros and cons of that for his training, or does it have any effect, if any, like if at all? And how did he fall into this thing, and who's he cycling with? Like those are little things that you find these little trends here and there, and you could blow it up into a much bigger thing. And so I think the whole purpose of it is like realizing that these athletes are more than just the 1 minute you see them on the track and then the 2-minute interview they do with Lewis Johnson afterwards.
Chris, so let's go off the track to the roads, and we got a little marathon trials coming up in February 3, and you're a 3:06 marathon. I don't think you qualified for those trials, but I'm pretty sure you'll be there and following them really, really closely. My first question is, why is it so difficult and controversial to host a marathon trials? I mean, we've been doing it for 50 years now. What is going on?
Yeah, I mean, like the drama was nonstop with this one, right? And with, contracts not being signed and, the conflicts of interest taking place and then the start time controversy. I think Atlanta was just really expensive. And maybe partly some of that was due to the super shoes helping all these people qualify. You had just like a record number of participants in it, and then having to pay for their travel and their flight and their lodging, once they were there. On top of that, there's broadcast fees and road closures and all that stuff. And yeah, it's expensive. And what's the return on investment sometimes? And I think like part of that we get to learn through some of these controversies is just like, well, in order for them to make a certain amount on or sell sponsorships, it has to be like within a certain broadcast window. Yeah, I don't know. And I think like just sometimes the, if it's USATF dropping the ball or whatever it might be, then it just, I don't know, like it causes more headaches for the host and the host city than it may be expected. And so I have no idea if the solution is just, hey, Houston, you're going to be the Olympic trials every 4 years. And then, and they did a great job in 2012. So maybe the solution is like find one place and just do it there all the time. That's or plug into an already existing event. That was something similar, I think, in '08 with New York. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what all the solutions are. And it was just really fun, I guess, to follow all the drama.
Well, staying with the trials, Chris, our listeners, I'm sure, would like to know this. Your picks. Let's take three, which would be the three favorites that would make the Olympic team, and then why don't you throw in a dark horse first? The women and then the men.
Yeah. See, the thing is, we're having this conversation in December. You talk to me next week, my thoughts will probably change. You talk to me that weekend in February, and my thoughts have changed, since the last time. And uh, that's my favorite part of this is that for that weekend in Orlando, you can pop into any bar. I'm assuming you can pop into any bar, just go up and talk to the guy and say, who's your top three? And you'll get a different answer every single time. And that'll be great. Who's your top three is going to be the best question that entire weekend. And so for me right now, on the women's side, I'm leaning Emily Sisson, Kira D'Amato, and Betsy Sena, with the Olympic bronze medalist being my dark horse, which doesn't even seem all that bold. I think Molly
Molly.
Seidel had a great Chicago Marathon, and she's coming around at the right time after, kind of a lot of ups and downs. But I think Sisson has been consistent, back to back 218, 219 performances, I think is fantastic. And this is going to be a flat, fast race. And if it's a little warm, we saw how she can beat up on people, at the 2021 10K trials. Kira D'Amato has been, also fairly consistent. I was impressed with, the marathon she did in Australia and that performance, or half marathon that she did there. But in general, just, Budapest was also a really tough one. But she's been there, and I think, the last 4 years have been really good for her. And then Betsy Sane is a wild card to a lot of people, but often overlooked, I think. She's out there training in Kenya right now, and hasn't really popped off on too many people's radars because she hasn't run a Boston, Chicago, or New York. But very sneakily, I think a lot of people will learn her name on February 3rd. And then on the men's side,
And
Chris,
Las
I'm just going to
Vegas is
jump in and
listening,
say,
Chris. So let's hear it, the men.
yeah, and you don't have to justify your picks, Chris. I'm just happy to hear you actually name people because I thought you were going to weasel out of this one. So
no,
just give us 3 or 4 names.
yeah, on the men's side, I'm going Connor Mantz, Scott Fauble, and Galen Rupp. And my dark horse would be CJ Albertson, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And of all the athletes who are going to be performing in Orlando, making the team or not, who's the most fascinating?
Oh, I mean, CJ Albertson is pretty fascinating. I just did a podcast with him, and he's a 50K world record holder. He just ran back-to-back 211s. Within a week. He's training like a madman. Like I don't think there's anyone else in the field who right now has a room in their house with a treadmill with 11 chicken coop lamps, infrared lights, and then some pots of boiling water to try and simulate the conditions. Like I live for crazy like that. And
We all do.
he's the type of guy I think who, will make it an honest race. And so I'm very curious to see, how he'll do. And he popped onto people's radars after the 2020 Olympic trials. And so the last 4 years have also been really good for his development. And so part of me thinks that, CJ Albertson is a 210 guy on paper, but he's trapped in a 207. He's a 207 guy trapped in a 210 guy's body because of the way he's gone about in race. Like there's no reason he should be running 62 for the first half at the Boston Marathon. Take it a little bit more conservative, and maybe he'll run it better and come out with a faster time. So I think CJ Albertson is definitely someone that people should watch closely.
He's a great
let's
one.
talk about Let me Amby, let me ask Chris about the Paris Olympics. I mean, obviously, huge interest in Kelvin Kiptum now, and of course Eliud Kipchoge, who the incredible career he's had, which may be getting near an end, but he could prevail in Paris. And where do you see that one going?
Yeah, I mean, it turns out we're not going to get that head-to-head matchup until possibly Paris, right? And so, Kipchoge's doing Tokyo and Kiptum's doing Rotterdam. So that's great. I mean, I guess like we saved the popcorn up until that one. And I think that Kipchoge's such a hard guy to doubt, right? Because every single time you start to think that this is it's over, he pulls another one out. And so he's like, I guess, Tom Brady in that sense, where it's like, you just got to count on the fact he's going to do this until he's 45. So But at the same time, I mean, Kiptum is just a force of nature. The way he aggressively attacked that Chicago Marathon course and gave 2 hours a scare was just ruthless. And so he's an incredible athlete, and I don't think we've seen anyone like him. I don't know if I believe the 180, 170 miles a week thing, but if he is training like that, then we got to kind of just appreciate it for while we have it, because I don't think that's going to be all that sustainable. So there's part of me that appreciates the longevity and brilliance of the past decade of Kipchoge in the marathoning, but at the same time, like, if we're only going to get 3 or 5 good years of Kelvin Kiptum's brilliance, then like this is it, and he might do some crazy things. So Paris, I might make it a toss up, because, and I don't even know if either one of those guys wins, because Kiptum has just ran really fast on a flat course, and Kipchoge tanked in Boston on that on a hilly course. So is this Cam Levins' gold medal to win? Like, that's the kind of thing you have to kind of think about. And so it's not a given. I looked at the elevation profile for that course in Paris, and it looks crazy.
Chris, maybe you haven't heard, but if you want to break 3 hours in the marathon yourself, you got to do 180 a week. There's no other way to get there.
Maybe that's it. I'm not training.
I guarantee that'll get you there.
Or
so
at
I'm
least
going to jump
pick
away.
A quicker course, where are you going to try for your 3 hours, Chris? What are you gonna?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not quite sure yet, because there's part of me that feels the temptation of Houston, which is coming up. But then at the same time, Valencia next December would be great.
Oh yeah.
I can't do a fall marathon. I'm getting married in September of next year, so like I can't do a Chicago or Berlin. So my options are very limited right now. But the next crack at it, I think I'll be a bit stronger and hopefully faster.
Great,
Chris. I'm going to jump you ahead to our final question, which is the fairy godmother question. We're giving you 3 wishes, and only 3. For Citius Magazine, what you hope to see at the marathon trials, Paris, or anything else in athletics in 2024. What are your 3 wishes?
Yeah, I hope that Citius Mag grows into the same way that the Athletic was bought by the New York Times for $500 million. I hope I can get something like that. That's my big hope for Citius Mag, is that we become a $500 million empire. And then a clean sport is another one I think I would probably wish for, right? It's we go into, so that's the hardest part, I guess, about being a fan of the sport, is just continually, the moment you get wowed by something, there's that little bit of doubt that creeps in. And the way I've kind of framed my own mindset on things is you kind of have to just suspend that in your subconscious and, assume innocent until proven guilty, or else you're not going to be able to enjoy the sport if you're just casting an asterisk on every single thing. So my hope, my fairy godmother wish would be that, clean sport prevails, and that we get 0 positive tests out of any of the medalists at the Paris Olympics. And I guess my final wish, that sub 5-minute mile. Once I accomplish that, then I'm ready to grow into, a dad bod or whatever it might be, and then just let myself go. Stop stressing over my training, and if I tick off sub 5 and sub 3, I've accomplished everything I've wanted in my own running. I don't a 2:45, a 2:35. That's all the same to me. If I'm just 2:59, 59. That's all I need.
Great.
Chris Chavez, thanks so much for joining us today at the Running State of the Sport podcast. We hope all your wishes come true. And I think you do have to do both, a sub 5 and a sub 3 hours. At any rate, it's been a great pleasure talking with you today, and we've learned a whole lot. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Amby and George.
George, that was a fascinating conversation with Chris Chavez. I thought he was really candid with us and told us a lot about Citius Mag and other running media, and also his own observations on the sport. What did you find most interesting?
Yeah, Amby, I like the fact that he referred to his years at Sports Illustrated, and he worked under, some mentors. I think you and I would agree, some of the very best sports journalists and editors of our time, Rich O'Brien, Tim Layden for sure. I don't think anyone covered the sport of running like the late Kenny Moore. And he certainly paid tribute to all of them. And I think he's lucky that, he was learning from some of the best in the business.
There was no place like Sports Illustrated. And you and I, of course, go back to Kenny Moore and all of the fantastic work he did through the decades there. And it was great that Chris got his chance to get started there. I thought it was also really interesting to me that he was able to make a distinction to the newer form of journalism that is happening now that he's part of. And it's almost something we wouldn't have called journalism in the old days, because the borders between advertising and editorial have diminished to a very, very narrow line. And he, in fact, said that it wasn't traditional journalism he was doing at Citius, but he was helping to hype the sport or to uplift the sport. And I think we used to do it more critically than that. But I think in today's environment, he's doing it the right way and finding an audience. And I give him all the credit in the world for making the transition that he has.
Yeah, and you say finding an audience. I think you're right. I mean, one of the things we all talk about when we talk about this sport and promoting it is reaching out to a younger audience. And I think Chris with Citius is doing a lot of that. I think he's really elaborating, on the personalities that make the sport so interesting, way beyond just times and records and things like that. And Amby, you know me well enough to know I always root for the entrepreneurs, the people who really put it on the line and go out there and start their own thing. And, man, there's no safety net when you do that. So I give him a lot of credit. And he said one of his 3 wishes when we gave him that chance was that Citius someday would be like The Athletic, which sold to the New York Times for, I think, $500 million. So go for it, Chris.
And we wished him good luck with that future sale of his business. And we didn't go on anymore. I think I probably would have added, and Chris, if you can only net $100 million, maybe you should say yes to that as well. Anyway, that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed us being here with us as much as we enjoyed sharing this show with you. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with our next episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving. Onward.